You're listening to Faith in Action. I'm your host, Matthew Nowland.
And I'm Sean Graham.
We lead conservative Christians of Tennessee, and we are thankful that you're listening to this show. Conservative Christians of Tennessee exists to analyze political policy and politicians in Tennessee, and all from a conservative Christian worldview. To support conservative Christians of Tennessee in our educational efforts, public policy analysis, and other needed endeavors, you can give a one-time or a recurring gift at patreon.com/TNChristian. Now, we want to glorify God by helping you to glorify God. Please do not hesitate to send us any questions you have, comments that you think might be helpful via email. You can reach me directly by emailing Matthew at tnchristian.com.
Or Sean, SHAWN, at tnchristian.com.
Our scripture for today comes from Proverbs, the 28th chapter, verses 1 through 5. The wicked flee when no man pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion. For the transgression of a land many are the princes thereof, but by a man of understanding and knowledge the state thereof shall be prolonged. Poor man that oppresseth the poor is like a sweeping rain which leaveth no food. They that forsake the law praise the wicked, but such as keep the law contend with them. Evil men understand not judgment, but they that seek the Lord understand all things. We enjoy having this show where we get to introduce you to great authors, politicians, and occasionally even Christian religious leaders. We often take this space to call out issues of the day and connect these events to biblical teachings. We do this so that you, the listener, may decide how God wants you to act on these issues. We learn alongside you as we're studying these issues, and we also see firsthand sometimes how the forces of evil are pushing back against us with their evil agenda. We try to point out denominational issues or trends where leaders may draw away people, like when they promote harmful transhuman agendas and destructive lifestyles that are being pushed on our families. One of the people that we have been pointing out for several years now is a transvestite male activist that has been working to see legislation passed in Tennessee that would allow males to compete in female sports. His name is Chaplain Darren Johnson. That's Chaplain. He'll let you know that. And back in 2022, we pointed out the hypocrisy of many legislators who refer to this man dressed as a woman as ma'am. We know this is radio, but even a blind man knows that Darren was born male, no matter what color the dress he's wearing today is. Some of you listening might take offense to this, and I don't really care. I hope God convicts you. You might even ask why we risk offending the lost over something so small as a pronoun. Our response is simply Genesis chapter 1, verses 27. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them. If you don't say something about the little things, the big things will kill you. Fast forward to this week, and now the same cross-dressing man was invited by Cameron Sexton, Baptist Cameron Sexton, the Speaker of the Tennessee House, to open the House session in prayer. Now that small evil that nobody would oppose last year, chairman of committees, making sure that they got ma'am right, a local chairman of a committee in the state legislature. This has grown into something that's even more openly an affront to God. A man who does not hold a belief in a triune God or in the deity of Christ prayed, Chaplain Darren Johnson, and you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes, prayed to begin the day in our Tennessee General Assembly. And nobody dared to stop it. Run that through your mind for a minute. An anti-Christian was allowed to testify for men competing in female sports, then was invited back to offer a spiritual blessing over our General Assembly. Folks, that is not a blessing. That is a wickedness. That kind of thing brings a curse on our land, and there's no excuse for it. Tennessee has a supermajority of so-called conservatives that should never have allowed such pandering to wickedness to continue. But they didn't have the principles. They didn't have the backbone to refuse a platform for such mockery of the God that they claim to worship in many instances. We're publicly calling for the removal of Speaker Cameron Sexton for allowing this to happen on his watch. It's stupid. It's ridiculous. Leadership matters. Godly leadership is not just a nice thing to have. It is absolutely necessary for our families to prosper. Now more than ever, we hope that you can see why we try to bring these conversations to you with these leaders. We want our listeners to know what it takes to listen to God's best plan for us, and we want you to seek out godly leaders and to support them. Today's guest is another one of those good guys we want to introduce you to. Representative Dan Eubanks has been a Mississippi State Representative for District 25 since 2016. Representative Eubanks was born in Hicksville, Ohio. After growing up in Arkansas, Eubanks married his wife, Corey, and they have been active in church ministry in the Mid-South region. Thank you, Representative Eubanks, for taking a few moments to join us on Faith in Action.
Thanks for having me, Matthew.
Hey, it's always good to bring in our representatives from around the area. Being a Mississippi representative, Dan, it has been great to get to know you. Explain your desire to serve in politics. What in the world ever made you get into something like this?
Sean, it's a long story, but I'll tell you because I think there's probably some of your listeners that would find themselves in the same boat. It happened back around 2014-ish, 2015. It was after the Obergefell ruling where gay marriage was legalized. It was under the Obama administration. Before I work at a church, I've been in ministry for about 20 years. And we're sitting there in a staff meeting, reevaluating how we allow people to use our facility. One of the things that's really neat about the church that I work for is we've always been really open to the community, let different community groups come in and use the facility. So the facility was being used all the time by different groups. But now we're having a conversation. Now, if we tell this group they can't come in, then, we open ourselves up to a lawsuit. And I'm sitting here going, wait, I thought we lived in the United States of America.
Yeah.
I thought we had a constitution. I thought the First Amendment protected that. And if a religious institution is having that conversation, so a seed kind of got planted in my heart and I couldn't get away from it. And when God lays something on your heart, you can run, you can get swallowed by a fish, but you can't get away from it. So my wife and I prayed about it quite a bit. And every time we fleeced God, it kept coming back. Okay, this is what we got to do. And I just felt like God needed to be represented in government. And part of the problem is the church has disconnected over the last 30, 40 years. They bought into this, separation of church and state. And this idea that we can't speak anything political because we don't want to offend a member or we don't want to lose our nonprofit status or anything like that. It's a farce. And so what it's done is it's created a vacuum. When you have godly men and women step out of public service, well, there's a vacuum, and that vacuum will always be filled with whoever has an agenda. And so I show up in a lot of big ways and ran. And since then, I've been very humbled and honored to be a part of some big changes in our state, but even to have been a part of some big changes in our nation. Now, I would tell you this, I had no political experience before. And so some of your listeners may be like, well, I've thought about that. I've kicked the can around. I hate the fact that my leadership either doesn't call me back, they're voting
Yeah.
the way that I don't like, or they're allowing certain elements to come in and open up in prayer, and they say, I've got to do something. And if God lays that on your heart and you pray about it or trying to operate in his will, then I think you should. And you don't need to worry about, well, I haven't been a part of the local politics or the establishment this or establishment that, because if it's God's will that you serve him in that place, well, then it's going to happen.
Amen.
And I think I'm kind of a testimony to that.
Yeah.
That was kind of what got me started. And since I've been in the legislature, I have always tried to keep that center. It's sad, but in politics, especially
Yeah.
in like state government and federal
Yeah.
government, we have a lot of people. I think most people that run for office, they do so because they have some ideals and they want to make a difference. But the problem is the way the system is built, that from day one, you're sitting there with your hand up, taking your oath of office saying, I will not trade my vote, let anyone influence my vote, sell my vote, won't do it to anybody else. And as soon as your hand comes down, leadership's telling you how to vote. And so that power, that sort of stress, it co-ops many of the good men and women the minute they get into office. They may have had good intentions, but then they wake up not very long after their service. They are saying, how did I get here? How did I become a part of the very problem I thought I was coming down here to fix? And so I've been blessed in that I've had a pretty good accountability group up until this last election cycle. We lost almost all of our hardcore conservatives in the legislature, but I'm back fighting the good fight, even if I have to do it by myself.
Yeah, that's really great that you mentioned having an accountability group. We'd love to have politicians on right after they are elected, and we like to bring 1 Corinthians 15:33 to their attention, which says, do not be deceived, bad company corrupts good morals.
Yes.
Not often that the Lord tells us not to be deceived. It is easy to be deceived that way. So keeping good company is great. You indicated that Obergefell was one of the jumping off points for you to get involved.
Yeah, it was. And if you remember during that period of time, under the Obama administration, there were people of faith that were, they were bakers and wedding photographers
Yeah.
and venue
Yeah.
owners, and they were being destroyed by the left.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one of my top priorities when I first got elected was that should not be happening. You should be able to adhere to the tenets of your faith without fear of persecution as guaranteed under the
Yeah.
First Amendment.
Yeah.
And so my first year, I was a co-author of a bill. It was the freedom from persecution. I don't remember the exact wordage of the act, but basically destroyed the ability for the left to come in and weaponize their local or state government to be the enforcement arm of whatever agenda they have. That if you have deeply held religious or spiritual convictions, that you should be able to adhere to them without the fear of being fined out of existence or arrested or put in jail. And so that bill was really controversial. I don't know how many of your listeners remember, but it was in 2016. After it had passed, I started getting all kinds of threats from people all over the country.
Yeah.
California was banning travel to Mississippi. It's ridiculous stuff like that.
Oh, that was over
And
that?
yeah, it was over that. It was defended up to the U.S. Supreme Court, which deferred to the lower court ruling, the Fifth Circuit Court. And it's the law of the land in Mississippi. You can adhere to the tenets of your faith now without the fear of the government being weaponized against you. And so we have that freedom in our state now. And I'm very humbled to have been a part of that. But that was kind of the thing. I was watching what was happening in our country. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist to see where we were headed as a nation. And at the end of that journey was absolute persecution on people of faith. That was the major impetus for me saying, I got to do something. I got to at least try.
Yeah.
And since then, it's been amazing to have been a part of several other really big wins for faith, for life, for constitutional, liberties. And as long as God sees to put me here, I'm going to keep fighting that fight.
Yeah. When you were doing that, did you get more feedback from your local district or from Californians and other professional leftist agitators?
Most certainly was out of state. I could show you some emails with some, almost X-rated with threats and everything else in it that was coming. And it was all coming from places like California and New York and places around the country. Now, you have that contingent within the state that will come and shout you down when you're walking to your car after you get a session. But for the most part, it was all out of state leftist agitators. Part of that group that has a dedicated agenda that fills the vacuum when good men and women with a moral compass and maybe a Christian worldview refuse to step up and serve. And so that was the group that I was taking abuse from.
What was the main lesson that you learned from that?
I tell you, I have had to grow a lot thicker skin.
I bet.
If you're going to stand for anything, to adhere to a particular set of values or a moral compass, and it's this way in life. You don't have to be in public service, at your job, at your school. Sadly, even at your church sometimes, when you have to stand for what you believe to be right, there will always be forces that will come against you. It was especially hard for me because having served in ministry, you care about people's well-being. You tend to be a peacemaker at heart. And some of the stuff, it goes against sort of like your internal programming. But then you start having to realize and sort of triage, what are hills you're willing to die on? These are non-starters. It's like, no, this is something that it doesn't matter how much abuse I take from it. It is worth standing up and speaking truth into the void. Because if you don't speak the truth, sometimes nobody will hear.
You're in an interesting position right now, taking another stand. You're running around this state like a crazy man. I don't know how you're doing this, going from top to bottom of Mississippi. You're campaigning right now. Tell us a little bit about what you're running for and why it's important for you to be running like this, because there's a pretty big dog in this fight who's been in this office for a while.
Well, Sean, you're absolutely right. I am pretty tired. Mississippi's a big state. And if you live up in the very top corner of DeSoto County, it's a long drive. So I'm rubber banding out from Jackson. We're in session right now in the legislature. But as you said, I am running for United States Senate. I was not entering into that lightly. There was a lot of prayer involved and a lot of fleecing God. And even when the fleece would come back, I'm like, well, okay, Lord, let the fleece be dry and the ground be wet, And eventually you just like, okay, all right. But, everything that is viewed through human eyes would say, man, you don't stand a chance. This guy, he's been a 30-year member of the swamp. He's got more special interest money. I mean, $6 million plus in his war chest. You don't stand a chance. If you look at statistics, when you face an incumbent and all of that. But the word that God gave me last year when I was going through all this was, I don't call you to be successful. I call you to be faithful. And whatever it is in your life, if he calls you to do it, don't not do it just because you don't know or think you'll be successful at it. We let him worry about the outcome. Because here's the reality. If it's his will that I win, if I'm the David versus the Goliath, it's going to happen. It doesn't matter how much money I have or how much name recognition I have, it's going to happen. And if it's not in his will, I don't want to be in D.C. outside of his will. There's a whole lot of political reasons why I'm running against our incumbent, apart from him just being there and being a part of the swamp for the last 30 years. He has ceased to represent a lot of the conservative Republican values that I and pretty much everybody I know stand for. And so it was another one of those moments where you start feeling that pull and you're like, I got to do this. And I truly believe, and I think most of your listeners will probably agree with me, that this will be the most important election cycle that you and I have experienced in our lifetime. And it matters not just who we put in the White House, but who we put in the Capitol building. And God's judgment will be upon us if we do not try to right this ship, because the direction we are headed is straight down a path to Sodom and Gomorrah and the fall of every other nation that has come before us, that has turned their back on God and pushed all of this leftist woke agenda, and not to mention the debt and foreign policy and everything else on top of that.
Would you claim to be a conservative?
Yes.
Would your opponent claim to be a conservative?
When people run a race, suddenly all the opponents and the incumbents, they become the conservative choice. I see that a lot with colleagues. I'm like, dude, I know how you vote. And that's kind of the case with Senator Wicker, who I'm challenging. All his commercials talk about how conservative he is, but they're all a spin. And if you really know his voting record, you'll know that's not the case.
That's
right.
And so I currently hold the highest lifetime average conservative rating of anybody serving in Mississippi state government. And I don't say that to brag. I say that just as a qualifier. And
by whose rating system?
As by the ACU, the American Conservative Union.
Okay, sure.
And I know what it's like to be in the trenches. I know what it's like to be the lone guy on the hill charging the line. I'm not putting my value in reelection, in position. And there's a lot of folks that their worth is completely tied up in that. I came down here to stand and to represent and to do what I believe God would have me do. And when I get sent home, I will have a clean conscience that that's what I've done. So I'm a verified conservative. I'm a known quantity. I think my opponent, he's spending so much money on advertising, trying to drive a narrative, not because he's scared of me. He's scared of defending his own record.
Right. So where do you stand on issues of immigration?
I am absolutely for us shutting down the border. The problem is that a nation is only as sovereign as its borders.
That's right.
And with no defined border that's enforced, we technically aren't a sovereign nation. I absolutely want it shut down. I've actually got 2 pieces of legislation that I've submitted this session. One of them is the House concurrent resolution, calls out the federal government and their refusal to defend against foreign invasion. It calls for our governor to stand up and stand in agreement with Governor Abbott and to send our guard to work in tandem with them to secure our border, because our federal government's not doing it and the current regime's not doing it. And so this resolution calls that out. I know Mississippi and our Governor Tate Reeves has already said that he is in support of Governor Abbott, but this kind of formalizes it. And then I have another bill that it makes it a state crime to be in our state if you are in the United States illegally, that it gives us the ability and sets forth the course of action to deport you. So, if the federal government's not going to take a stance on it, then it's time for the states to stand up and start doing whatever they can within their power to do it. So I'm very pro shut the border down. I think there's a proper avenue for immigration. I think immigration's a good thing, but it's a disservice to every American, to every other immigrant that has come here and gone through the process. And it has left the door wide open. I promise you, it's not just Latin Americans that are looking for a better life.
We've had so many people come in. We've lost our national identity. And I would say virtually all immigration needs to be paused, legal and illegal. We need a generation of people to emerge that are American again, in my opinion. And you might differ from that. Our immigration has always been driven by a need for labor. But one thing with the housing crisis right now, the only nation I know that a study has been done on related to housing and immigration is the nation of Spain. And the study revealed that the tremendous influx they had from Africa of illegal immigrants into Spain had driven their housing prices up over 50% over a decade period. That hurts young families.
Yeah.
That hurts the Dominion mandate. So I will go on record as saying, in my opinion, we need to pause virtually all immigration. Some specialty things, we need to be a nation that Americans can thrive in. And we don't need to put foreign interests above the interests of people who were born here. Again, my opinion. You're an outspoken supporter of the Article 5 Convention of the States. Why is that important to you? And is it time for us to all get behind that?
Well, it's kind of the Hail Mary. What do you do when those in an elected office refuse to limit
Right.
themselves? Our founding fathers were brilliant. I believe they were divinely inspired, but they were brilliant genius in the construction of our founding documents.
Mhm.
And for your listeners that don't know what an Article 5 convention is, it's basically when your federal government gets to the point to where they no longer listen, no longer represent, that the states have the ability to call a convention to offer or propose a amendment to the Constitution that then will follow the exact same process as when Congress does it. You know, when we got rid of slavery, when we gave women the right to vote, all these constitutional amendments were proposed, and then they have to go back before all the state legislatures to be ratified. Well, all this does is say, well, the states can come together for the same purpose, and it can go back before all of your states then to be ratified. Same process. People that are against an idea of an Article 5 convention will always talk about runaway conventions. Right. Oh, they're going to get together and take your guns and everything else. Whatever the call is for, it has to be a specific call. And if you venture off the call, your state can recall you as a delegate.
I think that could be a valid concern. I will tell you that Tennessee's General Assembly has had some special sessions called extraordinary sessions. As they've done a good job of reining them in, but there has been some risk there. If the states are vigilant, I think there's a potential there. I would agree with you.
There's guardrails on it.
Mhm.
For example, like when we have a special session, you can't talk about anything except for what the call is. And so some states, Tennessee may be a little bit different than Mississippi, but here's the check and balance. Let's say that your delegates go off the rails. They propose some kind of wonky amendment that's going to, I don't know, confiscate everyone's guns.
Mm-hmm.
It still has to go back before every single state. And the threshold, I mean, the 38 states would have to approve the amendment before it could become law. And so the threshold is very high. There's a check and balance. It's just like the way our system of government is set up, where you have a bill, it goes through the House. If it actually makes it through the House, it goes to the Senate. If it makes it through the Senate, it goes to the governor. You got all these checks along the way. Usually that's not how it happens. You have something go through the House, it gets modified in the Senate, so it has to come back to the House. Right. It gets modified again, and then it goes to conference. And so for something to survive the process and actually become a law, there's a very, very high bar. And there's a high bar for a reason.
I've got to ask, what are you hearing from people as you travel the state? What's their number one concern?
Top things are the border. That is one of the big, big issues with folks. The debt, pro-life issues are still there, but they are not like at the very forefront. They're like number 3, number 4. And I think even some national polling has shown that. It's still a big issue. It's just not where the border and, our national debt and foreign policy is at. The whole woke socialist sort of mindset that has crept into our government, I'd say those are probably the big 4 that I've talked with people about, and I've even seen in some of sort of the national polling.
Where can people go to learn more about your campaign for Senate and to see, some kind of speaking tour where they can come and hear you speak and maybe ask you some questions in person?
Oh, absolutely. It's real easy. You just go to daneubanks.com. That's DANEUBANKS.com. On my site, I've got links to all my socials, place you can donate. You can find out where I'm speaking next. I mean, it's all over the state. I don't know what your listening audience, how big of an area that is or who all hears it, but there's a chance between now and March the 12th, I'm going to be in your neighborhood.
Right.
And I would love to have you come out and talk with you. I'm the last guy that leaves every time, just like at church. I'm turning off the lights and locking the doors. I'm doing that with people when I go out and speak to groups. I want everybody to have time for me to get to know them and them to know me. But on my website, I actually go over 20 of the top issues that are important to people. Very easy. It's all video. You don't even have to read. You can just click on the video and I'll tell you exactly where I stand. That's one thing that I pride myself in. I know pride's a bad quality, but if I say it, I mean it. I'm going to do it. I'm not going to tell you one thing and tell somebody else another thing. So if I don't cover an issue, my personal contact information is on the website. Call me, text me, email me, and I'll give you an answer.
Well, that is great. And folks, again, that was daneubanks.com. That's going to do it for another episode of Faith in Action. Thank you, Representative Dan Eubanks, for taking time to talk with us. We appreciate the conversation we had with you. And if you'd like to know more about our Representative Eubanks and his race for the United States Senate, be sure to visit daneubanks.com. And let's keep all of our elected leaders in our prayers this week, even the ones that we want to step down. Pray for Cameron Sexton.
Yes.
And remember, the Lord shall reign forever and ever.